bring you some perspective now from the rock here in Pretoria, and our guests are Karima Brown and Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh. And Sizwe, let's pick up with you and talk about those 9 million South Africans who are eligible to go to the polls this election and who have chosen not to even register to vote. We see the scenes coming from Alexandra, a place that saw so many protests in the past months. There is still that sense of excitement, but we can't deny that there is a sense of it really is no use to go to the polls.
I think there are two ways to look at this. I think in South Africa, in comparison to other democracies in the world, we still enjoy relatively high voter participation. But in comparison to previous elections, it does seem as though the trend is towards lower participation. So by our very high South African standards, it seems like the political system is failing to excite as broad a base as it did in previous years. And I think one of the key reasons that that's happening is that a younger segment of the electorate is feeling disempowered and is not feeling as though its voice is being fully expressed in any of the options that are before it, and is being left out of the political system and opting not to participate. And I think that's something crucial that we need to think through as a democracy as it relates to a younger generation entering the political spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. And Karima, voter apathy is one thing, and then there's the issue of standing in the queue, and we see a lot of this unfolding on Twitter, standing in the queue and still not knowing where you're going to make your mark.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's very interesting, Michelle. I asked my listeners last night who's still grappling with what they're going to do. And Erin Bates, our political reporter, she was speaking to me about the Zondo Commission of Inquiry, and she was seriously not certain who she was going to vote for. And what was funny is, as I came out of my voting station, she came in. So she made up her mind, but she used between last night and this morning to decide which party will best represent her. And of course, she's been covering state capture, so you know that's the prism in many ways that she's looking at things. And I think a lot of people have that difficulty. They feel that one party represents the policies that they want, but they didn't implement them. The other people feel that the policies of one party is right, but they have no track record. We don't know if they can actually govern. Some parties feel that political parties don't want to deal with issues of inequality, of landlessness, of racism, and as a consequence of that, they don't feel comfortable with that party. So there are a lot of South Africans who don't know who to vote for. And it's interesting because we've got the largest number of participating parties. We've got 48 parties on the ballot. I mean, I folded my paper 3 times to just get it in the box because it was so long. And I'm interested to see how those smaller parties are going to do, particularly the church-based parties, because churches are generally highly organized formations, and these are also churches that are not in your mainstream church groups like, for example, your South African Council of Churches and so on. And a party like ATM, I'm watching very closely to see how they're going to do in the province of the Eastern Cape, because that is really their stronghold. But if you look at the fact that they've basically got a ready-made platform, they can just address the church. They don't have to organize a rally. They also get a tithe from the community, for funding their parties. So those parties we should watch very closely, and whether people are actually going to, go for those parties as opposed to, let's say, the traditional big parties that for many people have not delivered. But I want to pick up on a point that Sizwe made about the fact that young people feel that they are not being heard, that the issues are not, on the table. It's interesting that he says that because a lot of the party leaders are actually young. If you look at Julius Malema, he's under 40. If you look at Mmusi Maimane, there's a lot of young people that are actually in the big parties. Those are 2 main opposition parties. The one is the second largest, the other is the third. So those parties need to explain why their leadership, given that they are in fact the physical representation of the majority of these young people, are not attracted to their message. The problem for the other parties is, of course, also that there is a certain kind of ageism that has also crept into our politics. There's this idea that if you're old, you're useless and you must go and retire. And if you're young, you know nothing. And of course, the truth is that neither of those positions are helpful. We stand on the shoulders of others, but we need to open ourselves to new ideas from young people, make them comfortable, speak their language, and come up with dynamic ways in which to deal with challenges. Yeah. It's young people that are facing unemployment in the face of the fourth industrial revolution. So we've got to talk about whether coding should become a subject that must be taught, at primary school already, instead of Shakespeare, for example. And I'm not criticizing the arts, but there's a way in which an intergenerational conversation needs to go on in South Africa for young people to have faith and belief that the political establishment is not just using them as voting fodder, but genuinely listening to the issues that are close to their heart and that matters to them.
Yeah. So, Sizwe, that issue of young people, that's a big issue. If we look at that number, that sheer number of 9 million people choosing not to even register to vote, the majority of that number would be the youth. Do the youth have a real sense of what it means for us to go to the polls as a country united? Is it something that perhaps we take for granted?
Sure, I think it's a crucial question, not just for this election, but for our democracy as a whole. And there's some interesting stuff happening in this election because, as Karima says, participation is high among those who want to be elected. So there are more parties, there are more people contesting than ever. And if you actually break down the number of people who are contesting, it's about 10,000 across the country for all the provincial legislatures and the National Assembly. What you find is that the majority of those people are actually between the ages of 30 and 40. And only 10% are over the age of 60. But in our country,
what we feel, the sense we get is completely different.
And in the highest decision-making positions, people over the age of 60 tend to dominate now. So I think what's happening in our country at the moment is that young people are interested. Some of them want to contest power. But in the decision-making places where it matters in our country, they're completely underrepresented. And that dents their interest in politics as a whole.
All right, we're going to stop the conversation there because we'll get back to you in a moment. Let's get more live reporting